Hello and welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast, where it's not about getting the gig, it's about enjoying the gig. I'm your host, Tanner Guss, and this is the very last episode of 2019. Thank you to all of you who have been tuning in so far. It's been an incredible journey for me these last 3 months to have these awesome conversations and to share it with great people like yourselves. I hope you join us in 2020, have some fun ideas for directions to take the podcast in, and some very cool guests lined up. It should be amazing, and it is only awesome if you're there for it. So tell your friends, bring them along with them for the ride. And now for today's guest. Today I'm joined by the composer, arranger, band leader, retired trombonist, and personal mentor of mine, Brent Wallarab. As a performer and composer slash arranger, he's worked with pretty much everyone, notably the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, Benny Carter, the Count Basie Orchestra, Natalie Cole, Ray Charles, and Bobby Short. He's the co-director of the Wallarab Jazz Orchestra, and he was a founding member of the Smithsonian Jazz Masterworks Orchestra, where he was lead trombonist and principal transcriber from 1991 to 2008. In our conversation, we talk about his recent decision to walk away from the trombone, how to make relationships work as a touring musician, his midlife rediscovery of his self-worth, and the expectations we tend to have as musicians that in general lead to a lot of misery in the field. Brent is honestly one of the most important mentors I've had in my life, and I think he's just a great person. I'm really excited to share his thoughts with you now, and thanks for being here. Please help me welcome Brent Wallarab. Brent Wallarab, welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast.
I'm very happy to be. I'm a happy musician to be here.
I love it. Yeah, this is exciting because we've had a lot of great talks. We were in a composition class, and it was just 3 students in it this last year. So we had a lot of real in-depth kind of one-on-one conversations, and it's exciting for me to be able to share that with people now. And one thing that I wanted to definitely hit with you is that you started out as a trombonist.
Right.
And at this point in your career, you don't play the trombone anymore.
That's
and
right.
you had made the decision to put the instrument down. And I'm curious what led to that decision and kind of how your mental space and connection with music changed as a result of that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you the reason why I put the instrument away now, then we kind of back up from there. But I just reached the point in my life where I had to make some real decisions about priorities. And so I'm 55 right now, and I guess I quit the trombone maybe around the age of 50, so about 5 years ago, something like that. The reason is because I just have a change of priorities. I'm a full-time college professor, and that actually does take a lot. If you want to do it well, if you really want to be good and serve the students the way you should, it takes a lot of time, a lot of preparation, a lot of thought. To grade arranging and composition assignments takes some real concentration. Plus, you want to be there for the students. So that's my main job, right? It's my main job. I don't want to be one of these people who say, well, I have a nice college gig, but I'm going to leave as much as I can and go tour and do other stuff like that. I guess there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I don't know. Either you're going to be a teacher or you're not. And I think that being a teacher is it does take a lot. So there's that. But then I also have had a career as an arranger and composer for my entire life as well, which I still really love to do. And so that's a very big part of my life. Then, of course, I was a professional trombone player for a long time. So at this point in my life, of course, I am married, so I have a relationship, and I've had failed relationships in the past. And I know now that in order to make a relationship last, it has to be the priority in your life. It has to be. And I want to be a really good partner. And so being there, being present physically and mentally, that has to take precedence over everything. Mm-hmm. You can't say, oh, I'm going to commit to you, and then not. And that's what a lot of musicians do. A lot of musicians say, oh, let's get married. I'm going to commit my life to you. But the minute that I get called to go out on the road, see ya, and so there's a lot of that, and I've been there, I've done that, and I've had those failures. So in order to be an excellent partner make sure that my mental and physical and emotional health plus my physical presence being there was a priority. Put all the effort into being a good teacher that I want to be, still maintain a career as a very active arranger and composer. There's just no way that I was able to also be an active trombone player, because that means practicing a couple hours every day, and that means going out and hustling gigs and doing gigs on weekends, which means I'm not home, and it's just more time away. Something had to go. I'm not going to abandon my teaching gig. I love it so much. It means so much to me. I love my arranging and composing. Another reason I love the arranging and composing is it keeps me home. I can do that at home.
Nice.
But as a trombone player, that's the kind of thing that's going to get me away and out of the house. Especially in the 90s, I was touring a lot, all the time. Sometimes any given year, I was gone more than I was at home. See, that's the other thing, too. I feel like I was able to quit the trombone on my own terms. I wasn't having any physical issues. I wasn't playing poorly. It's not that the gigs weren't there. I think part of it was I'm very lucky. I sort of checked all the trombone boxes that I wanted to check. Touring internationally, playing with great musicians, playing with so many of my idols. I'm so lucky that I was able to play with so many of my trombone idols in a professional setting. And my technical abilities on that. So I feel like I was able to abandon the trombone without any misgivings, saying, well, gee, I wish I had done this or that, but I'm going to give it up. I was able to kind of say, no, I pretty much did everything I wanted to do with the horn, and so I was able to put it to rest, feeling good about it.
Yeah. That's pretty unique, because I think most of us are looking at it like, if I get to these things in a lifetime, I'll be pretty happy, Or I don't know if maybe all of us have such concrete goals in mind for what they want to accomplish on the instrument,
Sure.
But that's really cool that you were able to leave it in a place that you just felt right about. And then, it wasn't like you were losing something. That's cool.
Right. Well, I think too is, because I'm a lot older than you and to a lot of your listeners, and so the music world has changed drastically from when I was your age. And things are going to change for you. When you're my age, the music world is going to be very different from where it is now. And I think too, there's a certain extent where there were certain types of gigs, certain types of music, certain things that I really valued that I did a lot back in those days. And a lot of it is those gigs don't exist anymore. And so it's not like there were all of these opportunities I was turning my back on. It's almost as if a lot of the types of gigs that I wanted to do don't exist as much anymore. They just don't. And also financially, I mean, gigs don't pay any more now than they did 20, 30 years ago. It stagnates. And so I think part of it is I live in Indianapolis. Some amazing musicians there. We know that there's a huge, great tradition of jazz in Indianapolis, and there's some really great stuff happening now. The gig scene that's up there, it's almost like there's this new young blood, this new young energy that's doing all this new stuff. Let them do it rather than me think I want to cling to the kind of stuff that I play, and that stuff doesn't exist as much anymore. So I'm very happy to see other people come in and fill those roles that I had 10, 20, 30 years ago. It's exciting for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, and then the other aspect of what you do is, you mentioned arranging and composing in your career. And we've talked in the past about how even well into out of school and into a successful career, burnout is still a thing. I know everyone I knew in music school at one point was super burnt out. I know I felt that pretty much every year. There would be a couple week stretch where I was like, this is not good. And you went into that during your career as a composer, and maybe we could talk about that.
Sure. Well, I did hit a wall. I was probably my mid-40s, I guess, when I really hit that wall of real burnout. Now, I was still performing regularly as a trombone player, still doing a lot of touring. I was full-time teaching here at the Jacob School of Music, plus arranging and composing. So I was still juggling all that stuff. And I hit a wall, and I think that probably a lot of musicians, maybe artists do, when I really discovered my passion for jazz. I guess I was like 12 or 13 years old. So all through high school, that was it. I was just wanted to practice trombone and learn how to write. College and my professional career, music and me and my career was all I thought about. And I didn't really have any hobbies. I loved music so much that it was my hobby, plus it was my job, right? And I think a lot of musicians are like that. It's something we love so much and we just immerse ourselves in it and live it and eat it and drink it 24/7 for a long time. And maybe you have to do that for a while. Maybe to get good enough to have a livelihood and to really produce things that you're proud of, maybe you do have to make that sacrifice and just give everything to your music. But by the time I was in my mid 40s, I realized I did not have a very balanced life. It was still all music all the time. And then I realized it was getting harder and harder to become excited about it and passionate about it. And I just realized that it was all encompassing. And plus, I'm just speaking from my experience too. Might be different from others, but my whole self-esteem was completely wrapped up in my music, 100%. So if I had a really great day playing music or writing music, I felt good about myself. But if I had a bad day playing music or writing music, I felt really bad about myself. And it's a roller coaster. You're up and you're down, and your entire self-esteem and your mood is tied to how well you performed musically from one day to the next. And so that's a real emotional roller coaster. And I realized that I had lost my identity to music. And I realized it wasn't healthy for me to be so tied into what I did. My whole identity was, did I write a good chart? Did I play a good solo? And that really becomes exhausting mentally and emotionally. So I really had to step back and realize that my whole identity as a musician, what if I lost music tomorrow? Who would be left? Who is Brent? And I guess I didn't really know. So I had to really step back and think about what music was to me. And it's given me the most amazing life in the world, but it's also because I let it consume me for so long, it's prevented me from being as happy as I could. And so I realized that I needed to really assess who I was outside of music. If I could never write or play or teach another note of music, who was left? And I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And I said to myself, I hope if I abandon music completely tomorrow, or if it abandons me, I would hope that there is still a good, well-rounded, solid, worthwhile man left over. And so I had to really think about that because I was very exhausted of letting music be pretty much the sole source of my self-esteem for such a long time.
Yeah. And what kind of things did you do to explore that once you made that decision to start developing your identity as a whole?
Well, exactly. What do you do? One thing is I had to realize that the negative elements in my life were very much self-imposed. And I realized that that's truly a level of insanity, to where if I go play a gig and my trombone playing isn't up to snuff and I beat myself up over it and I feel bad about it, I'm letting that rule me emotionally, and then that therefore impacts every other aspect of your life, your relationships, your health, and all that stuff. And so first of all, I had to recognize that I'm more than a trombone solo. I am more than any given arrangement that I write. I am more than the guy who stands up in front of the classroom and maybe realizes I leave rehearsal or I leave class and think, oh my God, those poor kids, I just really I was not on today, right? And so you have to realize you're more than that, and you're human, and that everybody, that's life. But I also think that in the music world, we all kind of judge. We judge ourselves and we judge others. And I know that sounds pretty blunt, but it's kind of the truth, right? We judge ourselves and we judge others. Like it or not, whether it's a scene or whether it's in school, the people who play the best are the most popular, and the people who don't play the best are the least popular. That's just how it happens. It's a clique. It's a club. The great players, they're always going to be popular and liked and attract other people. The people who struggle aren't. And so you just realize that that's pretty harsh, but that's the reality, and I think that most musicians probably would agree with me to some extent. And so I realize that judgment is a big part of the music world and the music scene. And so in order to be a healthy person, you've got to drop that, which means you've got to drop your self-judgment, and then realize how am I feeling about other people? What if I show up to a gig, there are 16 people on the gig, and that 17th person is really not taking care of business? Am I going to vibe that person? Am I going to have negative feelings? Am I going to join in with the snarky jokes from the other guys in the band about that person? We know that happens. It's tough out there to be a musician. You have to be thick-skinned, and you have to not be drawn into that cliquish kind of negativity that's out there. And you find that it reflects on yourself a little bit. So I had to really understand that there is a certain amount of toxicity in any given music scene, whether it's academic or whether it's professional. A certain level of that. Not that it's overriding and it's this really horrible, dark, evil place, but I think any musician who's really been out there a lot understands that there is a level of that toxicity that comes from people who are so passionate about their art, but they also need the work. They need the money. They need the work. They want the pride. They want the sense of being accepted. And there's always that clawing and that striving to get in that circle that's accepted. And we know that sometimes it's hard to retain oneself when you're striving to get into that echelon or whatever. And we see other people being treated poorly. Maybe we've been treated poorly. Maybe we treat people poorly sometimes. And you just have to step back and say, how can I make sure that I'm not a victim to that to some extent? You know that it happens in school, right? And it happens in the real world. And so you have to understand that that's part of it. Again, it might not be super forward all the time. And yeah, we all have our friends and get together and laugh and have a good time. We have our great moments of music, but there's always that kind of underlying anxiety of, is this going to go away? Is someone else going to come along and do better? What if I have a bad month? Are these people who were my friends last month, are they going to start treating me like this other person that they treated because they weren't up to snuff? So there's all this anxiety that can really come into the world, the musical world. So that was a big part of my being burned out, not just doing it, but being so immersed in the politics of music, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, because when you're in that clique thing, when you're judging all these other people so poorly, I felt like that is what all of my experiences going to shows at IU were, is that I was just stuck in this mindset of judging how well everyone in the band was performing, right, instead of just celebrating like the beauty and whatever it was that was happening. Yeah. And the thing is, like, when you're judging other people like that, you're also kind of training yourself to judge yourself like that too. That's how you're gonna view your own performances.
Oh, that's exactly, you nailed it. That's exactly right. And if you do that for 5, 10, 15, well, imagine, being in that environment for decades, it's going to take its toll on you. And it doesn't mean that oh, well, gee, Brent, you must be a real asshole because you are just this horrible judging person. Well, I've always tried to be a very kind person and a very nice and welcoming person. I was never a backstabber or talk behind people back kind of person. But even so, as you know, that's just the music world. That's the jazz world. And so I realized that I needed to get back into some music that wasn't jazz, something that I didn't do, something I didn't want to do, something that I had no connection with, something else I could really enjoy. So I started listening to more classical music. I'm not going to be an orchestra musician. I'm not going to be an orchestra conductor. I don't want to write like that, but I love it. So I'm finding music that's not jazz, that like exactly what you just said, something that is not so closely connected to me. I found this really great indie rock from the 90s, and some electronic rock like Massive Attack and Blonde Redhead and Portishead and some other groups from the start in the 90s that it's so far removed from what I do that I can listen to it, not judge, not analyze, just not care, except enjoying it, right?
Yeah.
And that was really important for me to discover music outside of my field.
That's so true, because you kind of are trained to view the music that you're working on, whether it's as a classical musician or a jazz musician, you are judging it by all these characteristics all the time, and if you aren't making a conscious effort to also listen from a more casual, non-judgmental mindset, you're just always listening to music that way. And then
Always.
you find a music that you can't, well, and that happens because you get all the tools to understand the formal structures and the theory and all the decisions being made, and you can analyze it all. So you can theoretically point out like the mistakes that they made. But then when you're exposing yourself to something that you don't understand, you just can't do that because you don't know.
Absolutely, that's right, and it's so freeing, and it's so refreshing. I needed to have that kind of musical experience that was outside of myself.
Hmm.
And as a jazz musician, we get so closely connected to the music, it is really hard to listen to it without always being in that analytical mindset.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. And then other things too, realizing that art is art, it doesn't have to be music. But going to the museum more often and looking at paintings, not having to care about what the technique is, not having to care whether they were using acrylics or oils or other media, just enjoying something visually because it impacted me and not really trying to analyze it. I've always been a big film buff, but really enjoying film and understanding that film is another great art form using a different medium, and maybe doing some analysis but from a different standpoint, because I'm never going to be a director, I'm not going to be a screenwriter. But you can enjoy film, and I can kind of apply some similar analysis that I might apply when I'm listening to jazz to film, but I'm just not connected to it. It's not my field, and so I can do that and enjoy it, and there's just kind of there's none of that judgment to it, I guess. And so just diversifying my life, getting into some reading books, and not always making it about me and my career. And that's the other thing too, is as an artist, we are so driven to produce and to improve and grow and develop that everything kind of becomes an analysis. Everything becomes about me. What can I get out of this so I can do better, and then I can get more. It's very I oriented. Not just jazz musicians, but all artists. It can be very I oriented. And that was another thing that was really starting to frustrate me, was you just realize that a certain amount of success in other people's eyes is how recognizable are you? Is your music out there? Who's listening to that? And it's kind of like counting the likes on your Instagram or Facebook, like you judge yourself by how many likes you get, right? And it's sort of the same thing. I'm judging myself by, did Downbeat review this CD? Am I going to get a Grammy nomination? And so it becomes, you're striving for these other things that have nothing to do with music, but to a certain extent, we know that if, as a young musician, if you really want to attract a certain kind of following, you have to have that some commitment to self-promotion, whether you like it or not. That's what's pushed, right? Like if you have a band, or if you want to do this, or people buy your CDs or buy your tracks or whatever, you've got to promote yourself. You've got to create a product, and you've got to sell that product. You've got to push that product in other people. And every day there are more of these musicians coming out wanting you to hear their music. And so it just becomes this din of people almost begging for your attention, right? I've written this, listen to me, listen to me. And to a certain extent, you have to do that. If you have a product and you want to sell that product and reach people, advertising, self-promotion is important. You have to be able to do that, but you have to maintain some kind of healthy perspective on that. Because the next thing you know, you become that product that you're forming, that you want to sell. And so now all of a sudden, how your photographs look, what you say, what you post, the image that you're putting out there, is that really you or is that the product? And so how far do you push yourself in order to reach these people, and what do you have to give up in order to do that?
Yeah.
You know.
And yeah, keeping in mind that you're more than the product that
Yeah.
you're putting out on social media. That's so true.
Yeah, everybody is, and I think everybody knows that nobody is who they say they are. Now, yeah, maybe it's you and it's your name, but look, you are highly controlling that image of what's out there. You know what you
Yeah.
say. Maybe you'll say, "Oh yeah, I just read this really great new book that I read about in the Paris Review," right? Right, you're going to put that information out there, but you're not going to say, "Oh, by the way, my gums are bleeding because I'm not brushing my teeth enough." Right? You're only putting out the most attractive stuff about you, and so we know it's not real. And so I think that, and I mean, when I was out there with my band and we were getting a following, getting CDs done, and doing this recording and concert series. I mean, I was in that world too, where you're out there doing that kind of stuff. And then you realize that you're spending a lot of your time thinking about how can you urge or beg or cajole people into listening to your music. And that can take things out of you, because when you're working on your chops, you're working on hustling gigs, you're working on writing, you're working on arranging, you're working on promoting yourself and your products and booking gigs and rehearsing, then your entire life becomes that. And it becomes all about you. And sometimes you just lose sight of the greater world around you, and you can miss out on a lot. And I realized I had. So that was one reason I thought at that point, well, maybe I should quit trombone, just to let something go. And so I think I started thinking about it at about 45 years old, and I quit when I was 50. It wasn't a rash decision. I had to really think about it for years.
Yeah. Wow. There is just so much. There is a din. That's a great way to put it. Of things out on social media now. Things get released so often, and it's easy, I don't know, to be overwhelmed by that. And you had said something that I really liked in jazz arranging class, and that you had said that like 95% of the jazz music out there, like, I don't really like. And I felt like that was a huge relief to me to hear you say that, because in school I felt really pressured to, every time I would hear something, like, I just assumed that it was really good and that I was supposed to enjoy it, especially when you have peers or other teachers turning you on to certain recordings, like, oh, I'm really into this, check this out. And you kind of feel guilty for not liking it, but it's also worth keeping in mind that it's okay to not like a lot of the stuff that's out there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think so. And especially when you're younger, like when you're in school, yeah, there is a lot of pressure. You have your teachers and you respect them. And if they like it, then there must be something of value. And if I don't like it, maybe there must be something wrong with me. And that's a really scary place to find yourself in. But life is too short to spend your time doing things and listening to things that don't bring you joy or bring joy to other people. The best music is the music that comes from a source of joy. It can be anything. But if you should your music should be genuine, a genuine reflection of what you like, what brings you happiness. If you're going through the motions, writing and playing and performing stuff because you are you feel that that's what expected of you, or you feel that your peers will only respect you if you do that, it's not coming from a genuine place. It has to come from a place of a genuine place. What brings you joy, and only then or is a musician going to be able to then project joy and genuine communication to their audience. You can't tell someone else's story, no matter how great their story is. You can only tell your story. And so I realized at that time too that I wasn't going to try to keep up with every new artist that came along. I wasn't going to try to keep up with every new jazz trend. There just wasn't enough time. If something came to my attention that I really liked, then I would pursue it just because I liked it. But I'm not going to pursue trying to listen to every single new thing and new person out there, because I just don't have the time, and I need to start doing other things that are going to help me be a more healthy, well-rounded person. Now, does that put me at a disadvantage as a teacher because I don't know every new jazz artist that comes out every 6 months and is doing the latest thing? Maybe to a certain extent, but I also felt like I trust my students to, they're going to be on top of the new stuff quicker than I am. And I also know that a lot of this stuff is fleeting. Like I remember 20 years ago, the latest, greatest thing coming along, and now nobody knows who they are anymore. I know that a lot of this stuff, even though it might be current and might be exciting now, you kind of have to give it time to see if it really is going to have a timeless quality, or if it's going to stand the test of time. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't give it attention and pay attention to it, but I also think that even at your age, just trying to constantly keep up with the latest thing, you'll never keep up. There's too much happening out there. It's always changing. It's changing faster now than it's ever changed before. So I think it's good just to take a deep breath, step back, and don't put pressure on yourself to have to always be in the current trend, and come from a place that is familiar to you, that you like, and then your work is going to be the best, your best work, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think that creating something that you're excited about and that has that genuine quality to it, you're right, will just make it a better product. And because of that, it'll actually probably be more successful.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, even though you might have been trying to make something that was less genuine, but that you thought would be appealing to most people.
Exactly. And, the history of jazz is, it's littered with the dated albums of the desperate jazz musician in the 60s and 70s who thought to be relevant they needed to do a Beatles record, or they needed to do a Jimi Hendrix record. It's like, okay, I've got to chase this. I don't have enough confidence in myself. I've got to chase the trends, and maybe it made a splash then, but now, listening to some of these bands in the 60s and 70s playing rock tunes, it's awful. It's just embarrassing almost, some of that material that they would rather forget now, instead of being like a Duke Ellington, who was such a confident artist that as all this other stuff was happening, he was still developing and refining his voice that he was confident in having. So you might think, oh, my gosh, 1960, with everything that was happening in 1960, Duke Ellington, who'd had his band since the mid-20s, here he was 60 years old, what's he going to write? Well, I'll tell you right now, there's stuff that Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn wrote in 1960 that's absolutely breathtaking. And he wasn't trying to keep up with all the changing trends. He had his voice, and he was confident enough to just continue to refine his voice and technique. So even though he was writing masterpieces in the 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s, 1960, he and Strayhorn were writing stuff that to this day is still breathtaking. So I think that he's a good model, no matter what style you're in, is to not be so frightened at missing out on the latest trend, but just being confident with who you are and with what you want to say, and write your story and tell your story, and it's going to be genuine, and it's going to be good. That's, I'm a huge Maria Schneider fanatic. That's one reason. Well, first of all, she has chops and technique. What a brilliant orchestrator and composer. But she writes from her own experience. She's not writing from anyone else's experience. She's not writing because this is trendy. It's 100% genuine reflection of who she is as a human being. She has that confidence to put it down on paper, put it in front of her band, and that's why she is who she is, And I think all great music is like that, regardless of the genre.
Yeah, that's cool. And well, yeah, the depth of your own voice. You can keep getting closer to it.
Yeah.
Through the decades.
Well, I think so too, and I think that everyone has an interesting story. I think that some people feel that if I don't have a certain kind of story, a story of tragedy or a story of loss or a story of struggle or a story of victimization, that they don't feel that their story is worthwhile. Trust me, every human being is precious. No matter who you are, where you came from, what your family looks like, what part of the world you grew up in, your story is as interesting as anyone else's story. And that's why I think people need to be confident in saying, I don't have to hang on to certain dramatic pretenses or certain narratives to give depth to who I am as a story. If you're a well-rounded, happy person who loves his mom and dad and who has had a really good, happy, comfortable life, your story is just as important as anyone else's. And so I think that we need to be confident with who we are, and we all have a story to tell, and it's all interesting.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe taking a kind of a turn from there, but one thing I wanted to talk about was when I had reached out to you about the idea of this podcast, you had said that in your mind, a lot of the maybe misery that you find in the artistic field in general comes from unhealthy expectations.
Right.
And maybe you could talk about what some of those expectations are, and maybe we could brainstorm some more realistic expectations.
Sure.
Instead of those.
Well, yeah. I mean, I have to say that I'm a very happy person, and I'm really lucky. I'm a very, very lucky person to be happy and have a good life and good people around me. But I'm very saddened to see a lot of people in the music world who are pretty unhappy, and they can get pretty bitter about certain things. And I do think it comes from expectations. I'll refer to school. I think that in school, we kind of establish that there's certain expectations, like, what is a success? A success is that person who moves to New York and they get 4-star reviews in Downbeat, or they're sidemen with really famous people, or they're on the cover of Downbeat or something like that. We narrowly define success as this this very specific kind of set of achievements. And so you get a lot of the students say, I'm going to go to New York and I'm going to do it. And then what if it doesn't happen? And it probably won't. What if they don't do that? Or do they feel let down? Do they feel like they're not a success? I maintain that success is as varied as there are people, different types of success. I think the person who leaves school, goes back home to their little hometown in Missouri or Iowa or Central California somewhere, and if they go back to their community, bring back to their community so much of the knowledge and love for jazz that they got when they were away in college, and are contributing back to their community, the community that supported them when they were coming up. Maybe they have a family, they're happy. To me, that's just as successful, right? Or going to New Orleans and having your own band that plays this really awesome kind of classic country western music through a jazz lens with people that you really like, and you make other people happy. Why isn't that just as successful? I think that we need to let the young musicians understand that success doesn't mean fame, and that's kind of what I see is sort of the message, right?
Yeah.
To be a success, you have to be famous. Well, famous in the jazz world,
Jazz
which
famous.
jazz famous, right?
Yeah.
And that's a terrible thing to project to the students because we bring in all these people that are jazz famous. I like that term. And so therefore we're saying you have to be known, that that's what success is. Success is being a name that people know and that people talk about and get written about in articles. When that has nothing to do with success. It has nothing to, that's a level of success. But is that person happy? Is that person living a good life? Just because you are jazz famous doesn't necessarily mean you're a happy person. I think success is, are you happy?
Yeah.
Are you truly happy and content? And do you truly feel at peace with the life that you've made for yourself? That is success. And ideally would love for jazz to be part of that. But maybe that is saying, look, man, I can't stay up past 10 o'clock at night. I fall asleep. So therefore, maybe being a New York jazz musician isn't the right thing for me. Maybe I am more suited to a 9 to 5 job, nice family life, and I play jazz on the weekends, or I teach jazz at a community college, or I play jazz in my church. That's, to me, if you're happy and you're really using jazz as a means to contribute to your community in a meaningful way and have a meaningful, loving, happy, healthy life, man, that's every bit as successful as a Grammy Award winning jazz
Yeah,
musician.
for sure. Well, and sometimes I felt like you'd be listening to these super classic records, like the ones that everyone's supposed to listen to, and you have this expectation of, I need to be able to create this thing. And it, like this idea that if you don't have that kind of experience, you're not, like you aren't relevant yet, or like that you aren't a real musician, or that if you haven't gotten to a place where you can sound like that, then you need to keep practicing. And I'm of the mindset now that you could have just as profound of an experience musically, and it doesn't have to sound anything like those records. Like you could even have something that like they might not have even been enjoying themselves. They might have
Right.
hated the session.
Right, yeah.
You could have just as profound of an experience, and you might not have the notoriety or the fame, but what you personally get out of it could be just as valid.
Yeah. Oh, I agree, Tanner, 100%. And to kind of continue on with that expectation, I think that there's this expectation that jazz is only good and it's only relevant when it is innovative. That jazz has to always be changing the paradigm. It always has to be innovating. It always has to be creating something new. And I think that's a huge myth. I don't think jazz has to be a paradigm changing, innovative, turn the music world on its ear kind of experience for it to be good. I think that's a myth. And I think that puts way too much pressure on jazz students to feel like they have to create something utterly brand new in order for it to be relevant. I don't think that that's true at all. I think that jazz can be and often is innovative, but so is everything else. So is the automobile industry. So is the fashion industry. So is the fast food industry. There's innovation everywhere. So there will always be those innovators in jazz. There will always be those people that come along at the right place at the right time with the right idea, and they make great, massive changes that does change the direction of the music. And that's great. But the vast majority of us will never, ever be that. And we shouldn't strive to be that. And the people who truly change, who evolve the music, they're going to do it one way or another. It's like if a certain monkey evolves and gets that 13th stripe on their tail, right, because of evolution, that doesn't mean that all the other monkeys aren't out there doing their thing and contributing to their community. What I'm saying is with the jazz world, it's like that monkey didn't choose to be that. And a lot of the times the great innovative jazz musicians aren't choosing to be that. They just happen to. They have that genius that absolutely cannot be held back. It's there and it's going to change, and those people are going to be out there with us or in spite of us or one way or another. Maybe it will be you. Maybe it will be this person, but chances are it's not. So that's another expectation. What if you aren't that person who innovates and changes the jazz world? Are you going to be disappointed? Are you going to hate yourself? Are you going to think you were a fraud? Are you going to think that you were a failure?
Yeah, like how many B-class musicians, like jazz musicians in the last century that you don't see in the history books but could play their asses off
Exactly.
were there, you know?
Yeah.
And there's, if your goal is just to be on that list, that's a tall order.
Well, it is. And I think that for so many musicians, if your goal is to completely be different and change the jazz world, change the vocabulary, usually the people who do that, they do that on top of such a huge, massive foundation of tradition and technique. And we put so much pressure on young musicians now that they kind of abandon the foundational experience. They're not out there, right, being side men for 10 years before, side women for 10 years before they innovate. They're not out there learning all of the tunes and all the foundation, because we put so much pressure on young students to be innovative. They're not taking care of business. They're not learning the tradition. They're not out there being side men and side women. They're thinking, oh, I don't have to do that. I have to be, my teachers are telling me I have to be innovative, so I don't have time to transcribe every Charlie Parker solo. I don't have time to listen to every Horace Silver recording. I have to be innovative. So as a result, they're out there trying to write these crazy chords and playing these crazy meters without being able to swing for an entire measure, right? They don't have that foundation. And so I think that we need to, as educators, I think we need to remind students that for every Miles Davis, and for every Randy Brecker, and for every Dave Douglas, there are thousands and thousands of great jazz musicians making great music out there every day that we never hear about. You don't have to be that, and you shouldn't put. So I think that's a very unhealthy expectation to put on young musicians, because as you know, going out there, grooving, playing a great groove all night long with great musicians who are also playing of a single mind, and to be able to sustain that for an entire night at a very high level, I mean, that's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
You don't have to be innovative to perform and create at an incredibly high level.
Right. Well, and the innovators didn't really set out to be innovators.
No, they
were
did not.
just exploring their own voice.
Yeah, just like the monkey with the 13th ring on their tail. That monkey didn't set out to be the next wave of evolution in that species, right? You're right. They just are. It just happens. But it always comes on a foundation.
Yeah.
You know? And usually after they have been with a band leader or band leaders for a long time that they're coming up with. You know, they've been apprentices usually. You know. There are I can't think of any of the great jazz innovators that didn't put in some really serious apprenticeship before they are able to do things. So I think that's an expectation. I think another expectation that's unhealthy is that you're going to be out there playing your own very special brand of music all the time with people who want to play your very specific brand of music all the time, and that audience is going to be there for it. I think there are a lot of musicians, they get into their scene when they're in college, like, man, I'm just doing this. This is my trio. We're just going to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Then they get out there and they realize that if they want to make a living at it, they're going to have to do all kinds of other things. And you better be happy about it. You better be okay with that. You better be okay going to a gig and just playing standards. You better be okay playing in a cover band or a wedding band. That is if you want to make a living at it. They don't talk about all these great innovators who played wedding bands. Like of course Miles Davis played slow, middle-of-the-road dance band music with band. Of course he did. They all played that stuff. They all played in their own versions of wedding bands and cover bands and pickup bands. They all did. And if you want to make a living at it, you had better be okay playing other people's music the way they want you to play it if you want to get called back.
Yeah.
Right? And don't have an attitude. That's the thing that bothers me. It's like there are guys I know my age in their 50s, and they're dark, and they're bitter, and they're angry because they're not famous. They never became famous. They were never able to make 100% of their living playing their own very special kind of esoteric jazz. And so they think they're just dark, and they're bitter, and they're unhappy, and they're miserable. And I'm thinking, who in the world lied to you and told you that that was even a possibility? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you do have to set and adjust your expectations. And if you want to make a living as a musician, you're going to have to do a lot of things you don't want to do, you know? That's life. Life's doing a lot. I don't like doing my taxes, but I better do them. I don't want to get in trouble with the IRS. And, you know, back when I was gigging, I mean, sure, there were gigs I didn't want to play. But if I wanted to make my mortgage, I was going to play those gigs. And if I wanted them to call me back, I wasn't going to show up and act like an asshole, like I was too good for the gig, you know?
Yeah, for sure. That does it for this week's episode of the Happy Musicians Podcast. Unfortunately, Brent had to leave to go teach his history of jazz big band class, and I'd like to issue a public apology to those students. I did make him late. It was a heinous and unforgivable crime, and I hope in some small way the thoughts he shares in this interview can make up for the time you lost. He did have some awesome Coda question answers, and those are available along with links to everything else at the website, thehappymusicians.com. You can also find actionable advice snippets and explanations for some of the most important topics that are brought up for every episode there, including links to everything that is referenced. This week's featured track is entitled The Harlem Pipes. It's an original arrangement and composition by the late great David Baker from the Brent Wallarab Jazz Orchestra's album Basically Baker Volume 2, which is the second installment of a collection of David Baker's works for big band, which for the most part weren't really performed or played outside of IU. So it's a really cool chance to hear some work from one of the most important educators of all time, really, in jazz music. Thank you so much for being a part of 2019 with us. We've got great stuff coming in 2020, and you can help us grow and reach new heights in the new year by subscribing to the show, rating and reviewing it in whatever app you use, and sharing it on social media. You can find us at The Happy Musicians. Visit the website and tell your friends about it, please. There's a lot of people out there who could use this message, and you can help us reach them. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. Hope to see you again next week, and stay happy.